Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Garrett Graff. I'm the director of the Cyber Initiative at the Aspen Institute here with Aspen Digital, and thanks so much for joining our summit today. I'm pleased to be leading our next session. The full summit agenda and bios of our speakers are available at aspencybersummit.org, and I want to thank FireEye, Intel, and Proofpoint for making this week's summit possible and helping organize these conversations and let us talk with such a great and diverse set of speakers today, along with acknowledging Blue Vector, SICPA NA, and the American Gas Association for their additional support. I'm here now for the next 30 minutes with Brandon Wales, the Acting Director of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, for what I hope is going to be a fascinating conversation about the election, about the COVID pandemic, about the state of cybersecurity and infrastructure security and critical infrastructure across the country. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us today.
Garrett, thank you so much for the invitation. I am very happy to be here and talk about the important work that our agency is doing. Today is December 3rd. It is hard to believe that exactly a month ago on November 3rd, we were sitting down as a country to watch the first election results roll in. It feels like we have, as a country, lived about 25 years in the last month. And I would imagine for you sitting at CISA, it has actually felt somehow even longer than that. I wanted to start off today by taking you actually back 3 weeks ago. On Thursday after the election, CISA put out a statement that I want to quote 3 lines from. The November 3rd election was the most secure in American history. There is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised. While we know that there are many unfounded claims and opportunities for misinformation about the process of our elections, we can assure you that we have the utmost confidence in the security and integrity of our elections, and you should too. And my question, Brandon, is, we have seen a lot of claims, a lot of arguments, a lot of court cases over the 3 weeks since that statement came out. Is there any reason in your mind, anything that you have seen, anything that you have read, anything that you have heard that would cause you to change that statement today? Garrett, so I think the agency stands by the statement that was issued at the beginning of November, but I do want to add just a little bit of context to that. So first of all, it was not a statement that CISA issued alone. It was a statement that was issued by the entire election security community, the people who have been working over the past 3.5 years to improve the security of our election infrastructure. Folks from the Election Assistance Commission, the Federal Election Assistance Commission, people who represent bipartisan way, the state secretaries of state, the state election directors, the private sector companies that actually provide the equipment for most of the elections. Secondly, a lot of the claims that are out there have to do with election fraud, which is beyond the scope of the work that we do here in CISA and of the work that we have been focused on building. Election fraud is the purview of the Department of Justice and state and local authorities that have the responsibility for investigating and prosecuting that. The Attorney General has been on record talking about his views on the scale of election fraud during this election, while recognizing that they are continuing to investigate potential claims of fraud. So as of right now, we do not have any specific evidence of systems being compromised, but we continue to work with our state and local officials. If they have concerns, we are one phone call away from helping them and assisting them. But I think that there was times when our statement has kind of been misconstrued to say that there were no problems with the election, that there is that it was fraud-free, and that's just not the case.
We do believe that it was secure from external interference, which is our mandate, and we're proud of the work we did to get to that point.
I want to stay with the election for a minute longer to talk a little bit about the rumor control website that CISA launched in the run-up to the election. Tell us a little bit about what the agency's goals and hopes were for that website, and what lessons you feel like you have learned out of how that website has been used and the mission that it has fulfilled over the last couple of weeks.
Sure. So we originally put that website up in the weeks before the election, and partially in response to activity that we were seeing from the Iranian government associated with spoofed voter intimidation emails. And we thought it was an important way for us to put out accurate information about the security of voting infrastructure that foreign adversaries were attempting to reduce people undermine people's confidence in that voting infrastructure. And since that time, we have continued to highlight key parts of the process and talk about the security and resilience measures that were either always in place within those systems, or were been put in place over the past 3.5 years to give us greater confidence that these systems perform as expected. Now, again, I think we're putting out very broad information about how these systems normally operate, the safeguards that are in place, the laws that govern it, and providing information on where people can get more detailed information. You'll notice that our rumor control website is not the same as fact checking done by media organizations, which tend to be extremely specific to claims that are made in specific locations and around that have unique circumstances. We're talking more broadly about the overall processes that are in place, the overall safeguards that are in place. That continues to be, I think, important to educate the American public about how these systems work and why they should have confidence, and why there should be a high bar for proving that these systems have been compromised.
Do you intend to keep the rumor control website going through the Georgia Senate election, or is this something where this was a website targeted at the presidential federal races and you see it now winding down?
So what I've told our staff is that our election security mission, particularly associated with the Protect 2020 effort, will continue until all the elections are complete. We will keep issuing rumor control entries as we think that the situation warrants it, and where we think we can actually have an impact. And we'll do that through the end of this cycle, which hopefully will happen sometime in early January.
I'd be curious if you could talk with us a little bit about, this is the first election, the first presidential election that CISA has existed for. The agency turned two years old last month. I think it was on November 16th. Happy birthday. And I wonder, as you look ahead now, what lessons do you take away from going through this presidential election? Both in terms of looking ahead to future elections and the election security mission, but then also what have you learned from the security efforts of this election that you can apply to the critical infrastructure role that CISA plays?
Sure. So I'm going to hit 4 areas, and I'll try to do them quickly to get on to other topics for you. First is the degree of partnership that we were able to build in the election infrastructure community and the election administration community was incredible. Extremely broad relationships, extremely deep into counties and election vendors. And those relationships were essential in allowing us to execute a broad range of activities. Second, we were able to dive into that sector, understand how it operated, decomposing it into critical functions, look inside of those functions and understood what systems were critical to the operation of those functions. And then that fed into our operational work to understand the vulnerabilities and apply enhanced security practices around those. I would say third is our relationship inside the federal government. where we had information sharing that has been second to none in my 15-year history of working at the department. Information being shared between the intelligence community, our National Security Agency colleagues, Cyber Command, the FBI with us. Early awareness allowed us to take quick action, get additional information, pass it back to our colleagues in the intelligence community and Department of Defense for them to get additional information where they had insights and access. And that cycle allowed us to get ahead of threats. It allowed us to hunt for activity more quickly, and it allowed this to be intelligence driven, which it should have always been. Those are some key lessons that we are now applying to our broader cybersecurity work and understanding how do we, in an area where we may not have the amount of leadership, focus, and attention like we did around elections across the entire US government, how do we continue to get as much progress made on our mission? And then the fourth is, and this is frankly an area where we're going to have to continue to work, and this has to do more broadly with disinformation, what is the appropriate role for the federal government in countering disinformation? Where can we be that trusted voice, and where might we not be able to make a real difference? And how do we rely upon other voices? How do we empower the right people who can counter disinformation and misinformation that's being pushed out there?
I want to stay with that last point for a second, because I think it's such an interesting question. You know, one of the things that was, unique and somewhat unexpected was the way that CISA bit off this countering disinformation role. It was not something the U.S. government traditionally did in past elections. 4 years ago, when we saw the Russian attack on the presidential election and the Internet Research Agency, there was sort of no capability inside the federal government at all to combat disinformation. And I wonder, particularly around the question of we are, about to go sort of from this very heated and fraught election information environment into over the next couple of months, presumably a very heated and fraught information environment around the COVID vaccine and the efficacy and the effectiveness of the vaccine and the treatments that are going to be rolled out by the federal government. Do you see CISA continuing to play a role in combating disinformation and misinformation around the vaccine? And do you think that actually the federal government should have something like a disinformation czar who has a interagency cross-cutting role to take on big issues like this in the public sphere?
So Garrett, I'd say a couple of points. First is, I think we rolled this out based upon things we were seeing out there, and like I said, partially in response to Iranian government activity. But we were actually taking some lessons from work that's done by others. For example, FEMA often has rumor control up during major disasters to dispel disinformation that's put out there relating to the incidents or related to the aid that they release. And they actually operated a rumor control related to, I think they called it fact versus myth, related to COVID early on during the COVID-19 pandemic. That being said, more broadly, I think this is going to be an important issue for future political leadership to look at. I don't think the U.S. government has yet cracked the code on the best way of countering disinformation. And as I pointed out, the federal government may not always be the best option, the right trusted voice on these kinds of challenging, divisive issues. And certainly for CISA, I'm just not sure that the cybersecurity agency is going to be a trusted voice when it comes to things like vaccine safety. And there are other people in the government who are better positioned to provide accurate information to the American public so that they have confidence in the decisions that are made to approve, for example, vaccines for public use.
CISA, though, does have, and you have been playing throughout this year, a very active role in the security and insurance program of Operation Warp Speed. We've seen reporting just in the last 24 hours, including this morning, about foreign actors, North Korea and otherwise, attacking the intellectual property, attacking the healthcare companies involved in vaccine development. What can you tell us about the threat that you are seeing online to the companies involved in the supply chains involved in the development of the vaccine?
Sure. So it should be no surprise to people within the cybersecurity community that from the very beginning of the pandemic, foreign nations were targeting vaccine research and development efforts across this country using a variety of mechanisms to gather information. We are seeing that continue to this very day, and it's one of the reasons why there is a close partnership between CISA, the NSA, the FBI, with the Department of Defense and HHS-led Operation Warp Speed to provide as much cybersecurity support to the entities involved in that effort. And I think in part based upon things like what was released this morning by IBM, that there is more that we need to do to push deeper and further into these supply chains, not just the big companies behind the vaccine, but the companies that are going to be essential to get this vaccine from manufacturing through distribution, that last mile to the American people. So we're doing everything we can to raise awareness within that community, provide additional cybersecurity services deeper in that supply chain, and ultimately our goal is to secure that supply chain so that no effort by any foreign nation or other criminal organization has the possibility of disrupting this critical healthcare delivery.
How has the need and the partnerships that you've been trying to develop through Operation Warp Speed changed your way of thinking about CISA's role in interfacing with critical infrastructure sectors?
I don't think it's changed how we think about our role. I think it has certainly shown us that we need to have deeper relationships with inside critical sectors before the major incident happened. I think our biggest challenge early on during the COVID pandemic was that we were not able to, as quickly as we wanted, get the companies that we saw as highest risk, the facilities, the hospitals, others, up on our cybersecurity services because we didn't have enough relationships with the right people in the right places. So, one of the key things that I've asked the head of our stakeholder engagement division is we need to do a lot more stock taking about where our relationships are across all the critical infrastructure sectors, because we don't know where the next issue is going to be that's going to require us to surge our efforts into that area. And do we have the right relationships at the right time for us to get our services being fully utilized? And so that's really has been, I think, one of the key lessons that we've taken out of this process.
And that, by the way, is some of the same lesson effectively that CISA's predecessor, NPPD, learned out of the 2016 election, was that sort of starting to try to push back against the Russian attack. DHS at that point didn't have the election level relationships that it needed. So I wonder, this is obviously a hard thing to predict, but if you look at the failure of imagination that led DHS to realize that it didn't have the election relationships that it needed, now the failure of imagination of realizing it didn't have the relationship in the healthcare sector that it needed. What are you sort of thinking about in terms of, where we might see something that we're not prepared for right now, threat-wise? I mean, as you look across the nation at cyber threats, infrastructure threats, sort of what do you think is the thing that we're not prepared for next?
So I don't know that I could give that answer. If I could predict the future major incident, then maybe we wouldn't have it. That being said, I think partly the challenge is that there was a big difference between elections and kind of what we're dealing with in healthcare. In elections, we literally had no relationship with the election community because it wasn't really on our sector framework and hadn't invested time and energy. Healthcare is a little bit different. It has been a sector since the very beginning. We had relationships, but they weren't at the right level. We didn't have the right executive level relationships to actually make a difference during one of those critical times. And so it's less about do we have no relationship in some of these critical areas, whether it's in the electric power space or in critical manufacturing or elsewhere? It's, do we have the right relationships? Can we talk to the right decision maker if there is an urgent issue like a pandemic, and get them to authorize some action, to get them to authorize some partnership and relationship with the U.S. government quickly when we see a potential problem? And so it's more thinking about, is the relationship that we have maybe to their SOC at a particular company, is that sufficient for what we may need to do and engage with that company in the future? And I think in a lot of cases we're seeing from COVID is when we're in a really bad day, that one relationship is not sufficient, and we need to have multiple levels, and we need to do a whole lot more to engage with those companies and to build the depth and strength of those relationships so that we can take action more quickly.
CISA is, I'm going to oversimplify a very complex bureaucratic debate that's been playing out over the last couple of years. But CISA is primarily what I would describe as a carrot agency. You don't have a lot of sticks that you're able to batter critical infrastructure sectors to do the things that you want them to be doing. And there's been a debate through Congress over the last 2 years about whether CISA needs more sticks. Administrative subpoenas, other subpoena power, that type of thing. As you look back over the pandemic, do you feel that there are authorities that CISA should have or could have had this year that would have helped you navigate this pandemic more smoothly?
So I think you raised the administrative subpoena question, and that has been our top legislative priority during the past year. And we are hopeful that if we get a National Defense Authorization Act, that the authority will be captured in there. But even in that case, it's more carrot than stick. So that allows us to get information from an ISP on a kind of vulnerable IP address that we're seeing out in cyberspace, and allows us to actually connect that to an individual company that we can go talk to. Now, we still don't have any sticks against that company. We're going to be showing up there in a voluntary way, asking them to close this vulnerability that we've seen and exposed on the open internet, and that vulnerability in a critical infrastructure has the potential to cause negative downstream impacts. And we want to have the ability to make contact with that company. Today, CISA cannot make contact with a company that has a vulnerable piece of infrastructure on the internet. But again, we don't have the ability to compel that company to make a change. But today we can't even talk to them. And so we believe still that the voluntary approach that CISA operates in is the best one. There are significant challenges with trying to implement regulations in as dynamic a space as cybersecurity. And we believe that the work that we've done in things like elections prove that if we work in close partnership and provide good value-added services, we can have positive impacts even in a voluntary way.
I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 or 3 more questions here in the last couple of minutes that we have here. You have to be one of the longest serving employees in all of DHS. I know you came to the department in 2005. You're also presumably the newest agency head in the federal government. You've been acting director now for, I think, probably just a little over 2 weeks now. And I'm curious, as you look ahead now to the presidential transition, as you look ahead to the next couple of years of CISA's growth, what are you going to be looking for from the Biden administration in terms of where CISA needs to go and where you're helping to grow? We heard former Deputy Director Matt Travis on Tuesday here at the Aspen Cyber Summit say that he thinks that CISA should be a $3 billion a year agency. For instance, it's about half that size right now. And I've previously written about sort of into the size that, the agency writ large, personnel-wise, is about the size of the security staff of JP Morgan. So, it's a pretty small agency right now. And I'm curious, what are you going to be looking for from the next administration? Where do you think CISA needs to be going?
Sure. So, I think, Garrett, as you said, I've been with the agency for 15 years. So I might take a little bit longer perspective on what it will take to build, develop, and mature CISA to maybe what its full potential might be in the future. And I have no doubt that one day it will be a $3 billion agency. I just can't say today what fiscal year that will fully manifest in. With that being said, I think that there are a number of areas that I've asked the team to start looking at to get to be prepared for future political leadership, provide them with some key decision points on important parts of our work, including things like the support that we provide to federal agencies to secure the .gov. We've been operating off of a legacy architecture for a long time, and I believe that it is time, given the changes in how the federal government has been architected, the IT architecture, that we need to evolve our capabilities to keep pace with the cybersecurity threats that we're facing. And that's going to take some new thinking. It's going to take some probably radical departure from our legacy programs. But that's we don't have the answer today, but we have pieces of the answer. And I think the next political leadership team, what I want to be able to present them is kind of, here is the roadmap for how you evolve our capabilities to be where they are. And I think you can replicate that on a number of topics, including things like disinformation, which we discussed, including things like our information sharing architectures that we have put in place over the past decade. There's a lot of areas where I think we need to make substantial changes to how we do business to keep pace with the threats. And I think those are going to be some of the important discussions that I want to have with the next political leader.
And let me ask one final question about how the government structures cyber responsibilities right now. One of the major recommendations coming out of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission earlier this year was the idea of creating and sort of reinstalling at the White House a national cyber director, a position that the Trump administration sort of effectively did away with the White House cyber coordinator. The Aspen Cybersecurity Group actually picked up and endorsed that recommendation, its report yesterday about a cyber agenda for the new administration. And I'm curious what you think of, the idea of a national cross-agency cyber director. Would that be useful to you? Is that something that you think would be helpful to CISA at the table in these conversations?
Sure. So, Garrett, I believe that the official administration's position has not been to support a national cyber director. That being said, obviously, that issue is still being debated within Congress, and we could very well have a recommendation coming out of the National Defense Authorization Act for this year, recreating such a position. I think CISA is ready to work in close partnership with the National Cyber Director or Cybersecurity Coordinator at the White House, like we had during the beginning part of this administration and during the Obama administration. I think our major concern would be kind of what is the scope of that authority, and do they have the right degree of oversight over all aspects of the cyber mission to really pull the community together. I think there are a lot of ways this could be structured where it might not be sufficient to really advance a whole of U.S. government-wide cyber mission. So, I think the devil is going to be in the details, and I'm eagerly awaiting to see the direction coming out of both Congress this year as well as potential future administration.
Acting Director Wales, thanks so much for joining us at the Aspen Cyber Summit.
No, really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Garrett.